Since ancient times, Japan's indigenous Ainu people have nurtured their own distinctive language and culture.
The Ainu way of life. It was a harmonious relationship, with the Ainu calling good neighbors.
For centuries, the Ainu people lived quietly in northern Japan, carrying traditions older than the samurai and stories no one else was allowed to hear. But behind their calm image lies a mystery that Japan tried to bury. Who were the Ainu really, and why were their voices erased from history? Now, hidden records, lost photographs, and shocking new research are finally exposing the truth. What they reveal is not just forgotten culture, but a dark secret about identity, power, and survival that changes everything we thought we knew about Japan's past. Join us in this video as we reveal every detail. The DNA that shattered Japan's origin story. On March 15, 1991, inside a cramped lab at Sapporo Medical University, a quiet scientific moment was about to change everything Japan believed about its past. Molecular biologist Dr. Masako Yamada had been working in near silence for years, carefully gathering DNA samples from Ainu volunteers. This was not easy. Many Ainu elders were afraid to take part. They still remembered how Japanese researchers had taken their ancestors' bones in the early 1900s, digging up graves and treating their people like museum objects. Trust had been broken for generations, and Yamada had to slowly earn it back, one conversation at a time. When the first test results came in, Yamada knew she was holding something dangerous. The Ainu DNA showed a rare mitochondrial marker called haplogroup Y1. This marker was missing in almost 99% of the rest of Japan's population. It was not a small difference. It was a giant red flag in Japan's origin story. It proved the Ainu were not just another branch of the Japanese people. They were genetically separate, with their own ancient line. Then, in 1998, something even bigger happened. Construction workers in Nagano Prefecture were digging for a new highway when their bulldozer hit something solid. Beneath the dirt was a massive burial site holding more than 500 skeletons. These remains dated back to the Jomon period, Japan's deep prehistory, stretching from around 16,000 to 300 BC. Among them was one skeleton in remarkable condition. It was so well preserved that scientists could pull intact DNA from it, something no one thought possible in Japan's wet climate. The skeleton belonged to a woman who had died 9,000 years earlier. Her bones had been protected by a rare mix of volcanic ash and clay soil. Dr. Kenichi Shinoda from the National Museum of Nature and Science was chosen to analyze her DNA. He expected to find links to modern mainland Japanese people. That was the official story. But what he found shocked everyone. The ancient woman's DNA was not just similar to modern Ainu samples, it was nearly identical. After 9,000 years, the genetic line had barely changed. This meant the Ainu were not newcomers from Siberia, as the government had claimed. They were the direct, untouched descendants of Japan's first people. When Shinoda compared the Jomon DNA to that of modern Japanese citizens, the truth became even more uncomfortable. The average person in Tokyo carried only about 12% Jomon ancestry. People from Kyoto had even less, around 9%. Even the emperor's family showed only about 7%. The numbers told a brutal story. The people who ruled Japan were mostly descended from ancient outsiders. The Ainu, long called primitive, were the last true native Japanese left. Years later, as more researches were carried out, what did they find? Keep watching to find out. The genes that refused to disappear. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka spent 3 long years fighting just to study one single skeleton stored at Hokkaido University. It belonged to an Ainu man who died in 1873 only 4 years after Japan began forcing the Ainu into assimilation. This timing made the remains priceless. His DNA would be almost untouched by the intermarriage and cultural pressure that followed. Tanaka knew this was a rare window into what the Ainu were like before everything changed. To get the DNA, Tanaka used a cutting-edge method that focused on the petrous bone, the hardest part of the skull and the best place to preserve genetic material. He had to do much of the work quietly, knowing government officials were keeping an eye on his research. Even then, he never expected what he was about to find. The Ainu man's genome contained genetic variants that had never been seen in any other population. These were not small or meaningless changes. They affected how the body worked. Some controlled physical traits. Others shaped how the immune system fought disease. One variant in the ABCC11 gene explained why the Ainu have different earwax and body odor from most other Japanese people. This may sound minor, but it had been used for generations as a reason to mock and isolate them. The most shocking results were found in the immune system genes. The Ainu carried rare variants that gave them strong resistance to some illnesses, but made them more vulnerable to others. These genes were perfectly suited for a hunting and gathering life, where people moved often and ate wild foods. But once they were forced into farming, crowded villages, and new diets, those same genes became a weakness. This helps explain why the Ainu population collapsed so fast after being settled. It was not only the culture that was destroyed. Their bodies were pushed into a way of life they were never meant to survive. Today, something unexpected is happening in Hokkaido. Young people who always believed they were fully Japanese are taking DNA tests and finding Ainu ancestry. Online groups for hidden Ainu now have thousands of members sharing their results and learning about who they really are. Museums that once treated Ainu culture as something dead are now working with living Ainu communities to tell their story properly. The Upapoi National Ainu Museum, opened in 2020, welcomed over 1 million visitors in its first year alone. Still, the revival is fragile. Only 10 native Ainu speakers remain, all over the age of 80. Ancient knowledge about plants, travel, and spiritual life is fading even faster. Genetic research has also revealed a hidden Jomon pattern across Japan. The Ryukyuans of Okinawa carry about 27% Jomon ancestry, making them close cousins of the Ainu. Both groups survived by living on the edges, beyond the reach of early farmers. This genetic map shows the real history of Japan. A farming core in the center, and the true natives pushed to the margins. What do we know about the Ainu history? Let's find out. Ainu history on Sakhalin and beyond. The Ainu are the native people of Hokkaido, southern Sakhalin, and the Kuril Islands. Place names across northern Honshu show that their ancestors once lived far beyond Hokkaido. These ancestors, called the Imshi, faced Japanese subjugation starting in the 9th century and were gradually pushed north. Following the Zoku Jomon period around the 5th century BCE and the Satsumon period, the Ainu began forming their own culture from the 13th century onward. They absorbed elements from surrounding peoples while engaging in trade between Honshu and Northeast Asia, an era known as the Ainu culture period, or Nibutani period. During this time, contact between the Wajin, ethnic Japanese, and the Ainu of Ezogashima, now Hokkaido, intensified. Ainu society was primarily composed of hunter-gatherers, relying on hunting, fishing, and foraging. Their religion was closely tied to nature, with spiritual reverence for rivers, mountains, and animals. Meanwhile, Ainu on Sakhalin, called Karafuto Ainu, faced conflict with neighboring Nivach and Udeg peoples. After the Mongols conquered the Jin dynasty in 1234, they established a post at Nurgan, modern Tir, in 1263, forcing submission from the Ainu. In 1264, Karafuto Ainu invaded Nivk lands and the Amur region, prompting Mongol retaliation. By 1308, they had been subdued and paid tribute to the Yuan dynasty at posts in Wulihe, Nanghar, and Boluohe. The Ming dynasty took control of the Amur region in 1387 and established the Nurgan Military Commission near Tir in 1411. Admiral Yishiha visited Sakhalin in 1413, granting titles to local chieftains. Ming officials recruited Sakhalin headmen for administrative posts, including commander and assistant commander roles. These positions were hereditary, passed down patrilineally, and the Ming awarded silk uniforms as rewards. During the Ming rule, Nivh women married Han Chinese officials, and Chinese culture spread among Ainu, Nivh, and neighboring peoples. Agricultural practices, iron pots, silk, cotton, and religious customs, including New Year celebrations and symbolic motifs like dragons, were adopted. The Qing dynasty, which succeeded the Ming, referred to Sakhalin as Kuyadao, or Sagalian Ula Angahada, and asserted influence after the 1689 Treaty of Nerchinsk. Qing forces collected fur tribute and appointed indigenous leaders as clan chiefs, Halaida, or village chiefs, Gasanda. By 1732, 6 Hala, 18 Gasan, and 148 households were registered as tribute bearers. Manchu officials provided rice, salt, and gifts during annual summer missions. Local chiefs were also required to give their daughters in marriage to Qing officials to maintain control and loyalty. These centuries show that the Ainu were far from isolated. They traded, fought, and engaged diplomatically with Mongol, Chinese, and Manchu powers, while preserving their culture across Hokkaido, Sakhalin, and the Kurils. So, what is the origin of the Ainu people? Stay tuned to find out. The forgotten roots of the Ainu. To truly understand who the Ainu are, we have to go far back in time, long before Japan as we know it even existed.
Many years ago, there was a community that lived their life uniquely. These indigenous people are the Ainu of Japan. The Ainu are indigenous people primarily from Hokkaido, Japan's northernmost island.
The Ainu are widely believed to descend from the original hunter-gatherer people who lived across the Japanese islands during the Jomon period, which lasted from about 14,000 to 300 BCE. These Jomon people lived off the land and sea, hunting, fishing, and gathering food long before farming ever arrived in Japan. Their way of life left behind pottery, tools, and burial sites that still shape what we know about Japan's earliest history. While the exact beginnings of the Ainu are still debated, most historians agree that their culture grew mainly from something called the Satsumon culture of the Epi-Jomon period. This was a time when the old Jomon way of life was slowly changing, but not yet replaced by farming. Later, the Ainu also absorbed influences from the nearby Okhotsk culture, which came from the north. These contacts happened especially in northern Hokkaido and Sakhalin as the Satsumon people expanded their reach. Together, these groups formed what we now recognize as early Ainu culture. Rather than being a single simple group, the Ainu are better understood as an Ainu cultural complex. This means there were many regional Ainu communities, each with its own local customs, even though they shared a common identity. While they carried forward the traditions of the Jomon people, they also interacted with surrounding cultures across the Sea of Okhotsk. Some historians even describe the rise of Ainu culture as a form of resistance, as Jomon-based societies tried to survive, while a new Japanese state was growing and pushing outward. One of the biggest mysteries connected to the Ainu involves a group known as the Emishi. For a long time, people believed the Emishi and the Ainu were the same. Modern research has shown this is not entirely true, but it is clear that at least some Emishi were closely related to the Ainu and spoke Ainu-type languages. Other Emishi may have been different groups, including early Japanese speakers who lived outside the control of the Yamato court. The Emishi lived mainly in what is now the Tohoku region, and their tools, place names, and way of life show strong links to Ainu culture. During the Nara period, the word emishi simply meant people who lived differently from the Yamato Japanese. It was more political than racial. Over time, especially in the Heian period, those emishi who remained independent were labeled Eizo. The first clear written reference to the Ainu under the name Eizo appears in a text from 1356. By then, the Ainu had long been living across Hokkaido, Sakhalin, the Kuril Islands, and northern Tohoku, quietly carrying on a way of life far older than the nation that tried to erase them. How did the Ainu culture differ and stand out from that of modern Japan? Keep watching to find out. A culture that refused to be silenced. Traditional Ainu culture has always been very different from mainstream Japanese culture, and that difference is one of the reasons it was treated as strange and even threatening. Tanaka Sakurako, from the University of British Columbia, has explained that Ainu culture belongs to a much wider northern circum-Pacific world. This connects the Ainu to indigenous peoples across Northeast Asia and even across the Bering Strait into North America. In other words, the Ainu were never meant to fit neatly into the story of Japan. They were part of a much older and wider human network that existed long before borders were drawn. Ainu culture began taking its modern form around the 13th century and continues to survive today. Even though many Ainu now live outwardly similar lives to ethnic Japanese because of long-term assimilation policies, many still hold on to their identity and follow traditional ways known as Ainu Puri. Their striking patterns, called Ainu Monyo, and their rich oral stories, known as yukar, are now protected as part of Hokkaido's heritage. But the language behind these traditions is in danger. By 2008, there were fewer than 100 Ainu speakers left. In 1993, linguist Alexander Vovin said there were fewer than 15, calling the language almost extinct. Because so few speakers remain, much of what we know about the Ainu language now comes from historical records. This is painful to realize, especially since the language once held real power. Early Russian and Japanese officials even used Ainu to speak with each other and with Ainu communities. Today, there is a growing effort to bring the language back. Most of this work is happening in Hokkaido, but there are learners in places like Kanto, too. Ainu stories and songs have been written down so future generations can learn from them. A huge part of this revival comes from the work of Shigeru Kayano, a proud Ainu speaker, activist, and former politician. In 1987, he opened the first Ainu language school, giving people a way to reconnect with their roots. Even so, the Ainu language stands alone. Scholars agree it is not related to Japanese or any other language beyond shared borrowed words. Today, most Ainu speak Japanese or Russian instead. The Ainu never had their own writing system. Their language was passed down through memory, stories, and long-spoken epics. These gatherings could last for hours or even days. Their villages, called kotan, were built near rivers and seas where food was easy to find. Later, they were forced to relocate near Japanese fishing sites, disrupting their traditional way of life. Still, their sense of justice remained. They had no prisons or death penalties, only community judgment, which proved that even without power, the Ainu held on to their own strong and humane system of order. From centuries of silence, could justice finally recognize the Ainu? Let's find out. The court case that forced Japan to face the Ainu. On March 27, 1997, something happened that had never happened before in Japan's long history. For the first time, a Japanese court officially recognized that the Ainu people had the right to enjoy their own culture, traditions, and way of life. This was not a symbolic gesture. It was a legal decision, handed down by the Sapporo District Court, and it cracked open more than a century of silence and denial. The case began almost 20 years earlier in 1978, when the Japanese government announced plans to build two massive dams along the Saru River in southern Hokkaido. These dams were part of a national push called the Second National Development Plan, which aimed to industrialize and modernize northern Japan. On paper, it sounded like progress, but for the Ainu, it meant destruction. One of the dams was planned to sit right across the valley floor near Nibutani village.
I have arrived at the Ainu place. It looks amazing. Look at all those houses. So, welcome to Nibutani, the town of Ainu.
This was not just any village. Nibutani was one of the most important cultural and historical centers of the Ainu people. It was a place filled with sacred land, ancestral memory, and living tradition. To flood that valley was to erase part of the Ainu identity itself. When construction began in the early 1980s, two Ainu landowners refused to give up their property. Their names were Tadashi Kaizawa and Shigeru Kayano. These were not ordinary villagers. They were respected leaders in the Ainu community, known for standing up for their people and their history. They knew that once the land was taken, it would be gone forever. The government did not accept their refusal. The Hokkaido Development Bureau stepped in and forced a project authorization through. This meant Kaizawa and Kayano were legally required to leave their land, even though they had never agreed to sell it. They appealed the decision, but their appeal was denied. The bulldozers kept moving. In 1992, Tadashi Kaizawa passed away. But the fight did not die with him. Shigeru Kayano and Kaizawa's son, Koichi, carried the case forward. They filed a lawsuit against the Hokkaido Development Bureau, arguing that what the government had done was not only unjust, but a violation of their rights as Ainu people. By the time the case reached its final decision, the dam had already been built. The land was already underwater. For that reason, the court said it could not undo the project or return the land. But what the judges did instead changed everything. The court accepted almost every argument the Ainu had made. In its ruling, the Sapporo District Court officially recognized the Ainu as an indigenous people of Japan. That had never been done in Japanese law before. The court also acknowledged the long history of discrimination, land theft, and cultural destruction that the Ainu had suffered at the hands of the Japanese majority, known in the ruling as the Wajin. The judges described how the Ainu had been pushed aside, silenced, and stripped of their traditions in the name of progress. Even though the dam stayed in place, the meaning of the ruling was enormous. It said that Japan had a responsibility to the Ainu. It said that development could not simply erase an indigenous people. And it said that Ainu culture was not a relic of the past, but something that still deserved protection. Because of how powerful the ruling was, Kayano and Kaizawa's family chose not to appeal it. 2 weeks later, the decision became final, and almost immediately, Japan's government was forced to act. On May 8, 1997, the Japanese Diet passed the Ainu Culture Law. At the same time, it repealed the Ainu Protection Act of 1899, a law that had controlled and oppressed the Ainu for nearly 100 years. The old law had treated the Ainu as backward people who needed to be reshaped into Japanese citizens. The new law, while far from perfect, marked a shift in how the state officially viewed the Ainu. Many Ainu activists criticized the Ainu culture law for being too weak. It did not restore land. It did not give political power. But it did recognize that Ainu culture was something to be respected, not erased. And that change happened because of the Nibutani case. In 2007, the land along the Saru River was named an important cultural landscape of Japan. This was another sign that Ainu history was finally being taken seriously. Still, not every effort succeeded. In 2008, a legal attempt to reclaim Ainu assets held in trust by the government was dismissed. Japan also struggled to organize how it handled Ainu issues. There was no single government office in charge. Instead, small advisory boards were created. One panel in the late 1990s helped shape the Ainu culture law, but it was criticized for not including a single Ainu member. Decisions about the Ainu people were still being made without Ainu voices. That changed in 2006, when a new panel was formed that included an Ainu representative for the first time. In 2008, it released a major report that laid out the full history of Ainu oppression and called for real policy changes. This report pushed the conversation forward in a way that had never happened before. In 2012, something else historic took place. The Ainu Party was formed in Hokkaido. Led by Kayano Shiro, the son of Shigeru Kayano, the party aimed to build a society where Ainu and Japanese could live together with equal rights.
The Ainu today are merely a small minority of the population of Japan, at maybe 0.2% of the population at most, or about 4% of their native Hokkaido, being an even smaller percentage in Russia.
For the first time, the Ainu were organizing not just as a culture, but as a political force. In 2019, Japan passed the Ainu Act, which made it easier for Ainu people to practice their traditional lifestyles and protected their cultural identity without forcing them to prove their bloodline. This was an important step toward dignity and self-definition. On July 12, 2020, the National Ainu Museum opened in Shiraoi, inside the Upapoi Park. Upapoi means singing in a large group in the Ainu language. The museum was designed to be a center for Ainu culture, language, and history. Inside, visitors can see films, images, and exhibits that show the daily life and deep traditions of the Ainu people. It was meant to be a place not just to remember, but to keep the culture alive. The world has also taken notice. UNESCO has recognized Ainu songs, dances, and other traditions as important cultural heritage, giving international weight to what the Ainu have always known about themselves. But the fight is not over. In July 2023, a group of Ainu from Hokkaido sued the Japanese government to regain their right to fish for salmon in their rivers. This right had been taken away for over a century, except for a small ceremonial allowance. The group argued that Japan had violated the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which it signed in 2007. Even now, the Ainu are still fighting for what was always theirs. The 1997 court case opened the door. But walking through it is a battle that continues to this day. If Japan finally acknowledged the Ainu, what about those in Russia? Stay tuned to find out. The Ainu who were erased across Russia. The story of the Ainu does not end in Japan. It stretches far beyond Hokkaido, into the Kuril Islands, Sakhalin, and deep into Russia. In 1875, everything changed when Japan and Russia signed the Treaty of St. Petersburg. Under this agreement, the Kuril Islands were handed to Japan, and with them came the Ainu people who had lived there for generations. Overnight, they became subjects of a foreign government that did not understand them or respect their way of life. Some Ainu refused to accept Japanese rule. In 1877, 83 North Kuril Ainu made a bold decision. They left their homeland and traveled to Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, choosing to live under Russian control instead. Russian officials offered to move them to distant reservations in the Commander Islands, but the Ainu refused again. They did not want to be scattered and forgotten. In 1881, an agreement was reached, and they were allowed to settle in a place called Yavin in Kamchatka. Their journey was brutal. In March of that year, the group left Petropavlovsk on foot. For 4 long months, they walked through harsh land, carrying what little they had. When they finally reached Yavin, They built new homes and tried to start over. Another Ainu village, Goligino, was later founded nearby. For a brief time, it looked like the Ainu might be able to survive in this new land. That hope did not last. Under Soviet rule, both villages were shut down. The Ainu were forced to move again, this time into a Russian-dominated settlement called Zaporozhye. There, intermarriage and pressure to blend in slowly erased their identity. The Ainu, the Atelmen, and others were pushed together into a single group that became known as the Kamchadals. Over time, the Ainu language, traditions, and even their name began to disappear. In 1953, the Soviet government went even further. K. Omelchenko, a high-ranking official, ordered the press to stop publishing any information about the Ainu living in the USSR. For 20 years, the Ainu were wiped from public view. It was as if they no longer existed. Only decades later was that ban quietly lifted. By 2015, the largest Ainu group in Russia lived in Zaporozhye. Even then, their numbers were tiny. One clan, the Nakamura family, had only 6 people left in Petropavlovsk. On Sakhalin Island, a few dozen people still called themselves Ainu, but many others with Ainu blood chose not to admit it. Being recognized as fully Japanese made it easier to travel to Japan, so people hid their true roots. In the 2010 Russian census, nearly 100 people tried to register themselves as ethnic Ainu. The local government rejected them. Instead, they were labeled as Kamchadal, denying their real identity. A year later, Alexei Vladimirovich Nakamura, a leader of the Ainu community in Kamchatka, formally asked Russian officials to recognize the Ainu as one of the indigenous peoples of the region. The request was refused. Without official recognition, the Ainu in Russia are trapped in legal limbo. They are not listed as an indigenous group, so they have no special rights. They cannot claim land, hunting, or fishing privileges. Many are counted as Russians or as Kamchadals, even though their ancestors were Ainu. The Ainu have never stopped speaking out. They have always said that they are the true natives of the Kuril Islands, and that both Japan and Russia were invaders. In 2004, a small Ainu community in Kamchatka even wrote directly to Vladimir Putin. In the letter, they begged him not to hand the southern Kuril Islands back to Japan. They accused Japan, the Russian Empire, and the Soviet Union of crimes against the Ainu, including assassinations and forced assimilation. They also demanded that Japan's actions be recognized as genocide. Their plea was ignored. As of 2012, Ainu communities in Russia still did not have the fishing and hunting rights that other indigenous groups were granted. They were treated as if they had no past, no culture, and no claim to the land. Yet, even in this silence, hope remains. In 2017, Alexei Nakamura announced plans to build a new Ainu village in Petropavlovsk. There were also plans to create an Ainu dictionary, a small but powerful step toward bringing their language back from the edge of extinction. The Ainu may be scattered, silenced, and denied, but they are still there, and they are still fighting to be seen. So, what are your thoughts about the mystery of the Ainu people finally being cracked? Do you think there is more to the story? Let us know in the comments section below. Japan has kept secrets for centuries, but few stories are as hidden as that of the Ainu people. From surviving ancient empires, resisting forced assimilation, to preserving a culture nearly erased, their true history has finally come to light. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into hidden truths, lost histories, and secrets that Japan doesn't want the world to know.